Hello everyone and welcome to another Spotlight Talk presented by Historic Beverly. My name is Sarah and today we're going to be taking a look at the Moses Brown Orderly book that we have here in our collection. We're going to start with just a little background on the owner himself, Moses Brown. And I wanted to share a portrait of him that we have in our collection. This is a portrait by Gilbert Stewart of Moses Brown. So Moses Brown was born in Waltham, Massachusetts on April 6, 1748 to Isaac and Mary Brown. When he was 20, he graduated from Harvard College in 1768 with a degree in law. He moved to Beverly in 1772 when he married his first wife, Elizabeth. Not long after, he began his military career. And I'm going to switch slides for you. So on July 11, 1775, at the age of 27, he was appointed captain of a 42-man company of Coast Watch militia with a service term through the end of 1775. During 1775, he oversaw as his company constructed fortifications on Woodbury's Point, which is now Lynch Park, and Paul's Point, which is now Hospital Point, in defense of the coast. On January 1st, Colonel John Glover was given recruiting orders to form the 14th Continental Regiment to serve for 1 year in the Continental Army. During the first few weeks, Colonel Glover continued to bolster the coastal defenses built by Brown's company and supervised the additional construction of military barracks where the new regiment could serve as guards for General Washington's schooner fleet and their captured vessels. On January 14th, Glover officially called for recruits to join his new regiment and gave Moses Brown a captain's commission. Several of the men from Brown's Coast Watch Company enlisted with him, as well as a number of other Beverly men. Brown's company left Beverly with the rest of the 14th Continental on July 19, 1776, when the regiment marched south to join the Continental Army around New York. They would ultimately serve in several battles, including the battles of Long Island and the Battle of White Plains. With the end of their enlistment drawing near, Washington decided to use the 14th Regiment for a final mission, which became known as the Battle of Trenton. On the night of December 25th into the 26th of 1776, Beverly Captain Moses Brown and his company, which, as I mentioned before, did include several Beverly men, were selected to serve as boatsmen who would shuttle Washington and his 2,400 troops across the Delaware to engage the British Hessians in a surprise attack. The raids were a success, and after only an hour, the Hessians surrendered and nearly 1,000 of the troops were taken captive. Continental forces suffered only 6 injuries, and the victory served as a huge morale booster for Continental forces. Washington had hoped that the victory would encourage the men to re-enlist, but unfortunately several did not and left the army soon after their enlistment period ended. And this item that you're seeing on your screen here is a 1775 letter to Moses Brown, empowering him to enlist a company of 40 men in the Massachusetts service by the order of Congress. After the war, Moses Brown returned to Beverly along with a large portion of the 14th Regiment and resumed a life of business. His privateering and mercantile partnership with brother-in-law Israel Thorndike proved to be very lucrative, and Brown became one of the wealthiest citizens in Beverly. He was widowed in 1788 when Elizabeth died of pulmonary consumption, which we today know as tuberculosis. He married for the second time in 1789 to Mary Bridges of Salem. He became a business partner of the Cabots and was elected to the first board of directors of the Beverly Bank in 1802. He was able to retire in 1800 at the age of 52, and he continued to live in Beverly until he died in June of 1820. And the item that you're seeing here on your screen is a 1798 invoice that was prepared by Moses Brown for goods shipped on the ship Sally. As I had mentioned previously, Moses Brown made his post-war fortune in this business. And what you'll notice by seeing his handwriting here is we will see that handwriting throughout the orderly book. I'm going to go ahead and unshare my screen with you now so that you can take a look at the orderly book. You should see the book appearing in just a moment on your screen. Because of how fragile the book is, we're not going to be flipping through it today, but I have taken some pictures of some interesting elements at the book that we're going to go through shortly. But I wanted to give you guys a chance to take a look at the book in person. So what exactly is an orderly book? Well, orderly books can essentially be thought of as the diary of the Army. It was a record that was kept by military headquarters that documented all orders and instructions received from higher authorities and commanders in one place. Orderly books were crucial to military operations as they documented and organized day-to-day aspects of life in the military. Some of the things that may be noted in an orderly book include regimental orders, muster rolls, pay rolls, clothing and arms returns, inspection reports, orders related to the Army's organization, orders specifying the Army's command structure, and detailed accounts of general court-martial cases, including charges, depositions, and sentences. Although orderly books were not authorized to include additional content, we do find that some orderly books were used to record notes of personal expenses and loans, lists of rations issued, mileage marched, Army routes, and other things. In a small minority of books, we do also find poems, song lyrics, and kind of cartoon-like folk art sketches. In 1780, Major General Robert Howe ordered a review of orderly books across all departments and was less than pleased with the unauthorized use in finding cartoons, poems, lyrics, things of that nature. He chastised several departments and regiments and referred to their orderly books as an incoherent, incomprehensible parcel of stuff. On average, an orderly book would have been expected to last for roughly 3 months, meaning that over the course of the American Revolution, roughly 20,000 books would have been produced. Today, however, there are less than 1,000 that have known to have survived. The majority of those that have survived come from New England states, and those from southern states are relatively rare to find. Although the specific reasons as to why this is unknown, many historians believe a significant factor is the heavy devastation that was caused in the South during the Civil War. Given that a large majority of orderly books were developed through transcription of verbal dictation, the penmanship and readability varies tremendously throughout these books. Many books feature poor penmanship, numerous misspellings, errors in syntax, scratch-outs, and ink blots. Run-on sentences are common, and capitalization is seemingly used at random. Even without the effect of fading ink, a significant proportion of these original manuscripts are quite difficult to read in their original format. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and reshare my screen with you guys so we can take a look at some of the features of this book. You should see some images popping back up shortly for you. So the first page that I wanted to highlight is actually the first page itself of Moses Brown's orderly book. This is the title page that we see when we open the book up. It reads, "Orderly book belonging to Captain Moses Brown, 14th Regiment." And as we can see, the writing itself is quite ornate. It's quite decorative in a sense. We can see kind of the spirals below 14th Regiment, kind of the wisps surrounding the top. It's very decorative in and of itself. Very much probably not something that would have been appropriate for the time. Major General Howe probably would not have approved of how decorative the book was. The next page that I wanted to highlight is an excerpt from the orderly book, and about halfway down we see an entry that is dated Cambridge, January 10th, 1776. This would have been at headquarters at the time. And a little about halfway down where the kind of paragraph break is, we see reference to His Excellency General Washington. these were the things that would have been commonly found in orderly books. It wasn't necessarily recording information that only pertained to the regiment itself. It was general orders across the board. So in this instance, this isn't General Washington speaking directly to the 14th Regiment, but he is, it's noting that he's appointed a new person into the Army with high rank status. On the next page, we can see kind of what I was talking about earlier, where there would have been crossouts and things like that found in books. This is an example of what would have been kind of a deletion for their day. The part that's crossed out, it is a little hard to read because of the crossouts, but it does talk about an upcoming court-martial case that is supposed to happen the next day. It talks about where it's going to take place, what time it's going to take place, and that evidence should be brought forward at that time. It was then seemingly crossed out for, unfortunately, what reason we don't know. The entry above it and the entry below it, unfortunately, don't seem to pertain to that information, so it is a little difficult to know what happened, unfortunately. But again, things like this were commonly found if information changed or perhaps the court-martial case was canceled for some reason. The next find in the book is something I had mentioned previously, and it is a little kind of drawing of a little, perhaps a man with a hat with a feather and a very ruffled shirt or ruffled collar. As I mentioned, doodles like this were quite frowned upon, perhaps even more so than the decorative title page would have been. This is the only such instance in the orderly book of a little doodle like this, so it is particularly rare find. And it is quite small when you see it in person. If you look above, you can see that the doodle just fits under the word above it, which is Salem. So it is quite small, almost as if the person drawing it knew they shouldn't have been. The last page that I wanted to highlight for you guys is actually the very last page in the orderly book. It is dated October 19th, 1776, and what it does is it extends congratulations to Colonel Glover and his brigade for their gallant behavior and their prudent, cool, soldier-like conduct the day before. The day before, which would have been October 18th, 1776, was the Battle of Pell's Point, which took place in New York. While the battle was considered a tactical British victory, it was actually a strategic retreat by the Americans. The retreat allowed General Washington to move the main army out of Manhattan to White Plains and avoid being surrounded by British forces. If Washington had been surrounded, it would have spelled disaster for the American cause. So it really was a very strategic battle. And just like the Battle of Trenton, Colonel Glover and Captain Brown were there and engaged in those battles. I'm going to go ahead and reshare my screen so that you guys can take another peek at the orderly book. You should see that popping up shortly. Okay. So we're back on the orderly book. And we can see on these pages, it does appear that there are two different handwritings in the book. We can see that there are some calculations up at the top. Looks like they're trying to figure out the, perhaps the muster or the order of the guard, something to that effect. We can see especially the handwritings are varied down. I'm not going to touch the book, but we have on this side the one handwriting. Down here, there's the third handwriting, and it changes once again for this last portion of the page. So to speak directly on this orderly book, this book contains entries from January through October 1776. The book itself is about 6.5 by 8 inches, and it is sewn together with hemp thread. Many different handwritings appear in the book, as I had mentioned, And this is indicative of many people writing in the book, that there wasn't just one person who was designated the task of updating this book. Some companies did have someone whose job was specifically to do that. They were known fittingly as an orderly, but it doesn't appear that this was the case here. It appears that several people did make notes in this. And as I had touched on earlier, the fact that there are so many handwritings in here, some which are legible, some which are not, some which have great grammar, some don't, some have very proper spelling, some don't. So it does make it quite difficult to read the book as a whole. In this book particularly, a lot of what we find are orders relating to the Army's organization, instructions received from high-ranking officers, information on court-martials, instructions from Congress, and as we saw earlier, orders from General Washington. So that was a little presentation on Moses Brown's orderly book that we have here in our collection. We have several other Moses Brown pieces and a lot of Revolutionary War pieces. So we would love to have you guys attend the Cabot House in the future to come for a tour or another program. And if you have any questions about what you saw here today, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thanks so much for coming. Take care. Bye-bye.